Is it true that there's no science behind the carnivore and keto diets? Hi, I'm Dr. Eric Westman, and welcome to my channel where I review and debunk nutritional misinformation online. In this video by Dr. Joel Fuhrman, who is an avowed plant-based promoter, we're going to see why he thinks there's no science about the carnivore and keto diet. Be sure to listen to the end to hear what I truly think about it.
I sat down on my computer when we were prepping for this episode, and I'm like, I know the carnivore people and people who eat high protein diets are very loud on the internet, and they say, I'm right, he's wrong. She's right, she's wrong. Right. And so I just wanted to see where they're getting their information from. Where are these studies? You know, what's the other side? So I sit down and I go Google like research on carnivore diet, research on high protein, research on keto. Right. And there is so little research. I was shocked.
Well, so hang on. I know now why there wasn't research found. She was searching the wrong thing. Low carbohydrate is the term that incorporates most of the research on carbohydrate restriction. That's the other term that we clinical trialists came up with some years ago to how to really describe scientifically a program that limited carbohydrates. So there's fat-restricted diets, like a plant-based one. There are carbohydrate-restricted diets, like a low-carb or not high protein, and then only recently has it been understood, even though it's already been there for a long time, that if you get the low-carb low enough, it becomes a ketogenic diet. So that might be why she didn't find the research. And also there's a textbook now called Ketogenic, the science behind carbohydrate restricted diets and human health. Or therapeutic carbohydrate restriction is the other term that would have brought up some studies.
And you do not deny that there are some short-term benefits of carnivore.
We have to discuss the benefits so people understand why people gravitate to those diets and feel better. You know, they're looking at short-term research where it lowers cholesterol, they drop their body weight,
diabetes.
Their diabetes numbers look better.
Hang on, sorry. It is a grassroots change. And in the world I've been in, 24 years ago, when I looked on the internet for the Atkins diet, there were all these pre-post photos, pre-post, and yet people said there's no evidence. There's no evidence. So the idea that you're going to find a research paper now to describe what is really kind of a recent phenomenon would be kind of like asking, you know, what did people do for cell phones, 20 years ago, and then over time, phone use, it all has changed. So it doesn't surprise me that you're not going to find a whole lot in the published literature. That doesn't mean that it can't be helpful, although I share the criticism and the need for systematic research on low-carb diets and keto diets and any diet for that matter, including a carnivore diet. But there are some incredible changes that in the short run look great. But the language that Dr. Fuhrman used was interesting. He said improvements in numbers. No, you can reverse type 2 diabetes, just let's call it like it is. And they're going to quibble about, well, you really still have diabetes underneath, but it's just not, that doesn't make sense to me. You can reverse type 2 diabetes in many different ways. And Dr. Fuhrman is actually one of those people who thinks there's only one way to do things or not many. And that, I guess, let's see what studies there are or lack thereof.
That the short-term studies may show some benefits, but now we finally have long-term studies. And to be a carnivore or keto advocate, you have to have some illogical rationalization as why you're going to disregard 100 long-term studies that show danger. And they do. They throw them all out the window. They say, I was interviewed by and debated this guy, Saladino, who was one of the founders of the carnivore diet, who said, oh, all those studies don't matter because they're epidemiological studies, and it's just led to the people who are more wealthy or have television sets are going to be healthier, and most of the people who are vegans or something like that. You just threw out all the studies. So I'm saying you can't throw out all the studies that corroborate each other from all the parts of the world. Now we have really incredibly effective, appropriate, and intellectually done research showing long-term following these people on these keto diets and heavy protein diets for 20 years, 30 years, showing how dangerous they are.
So, but how could you follow someone for 20 years when it's something that just started now? So this is the classic looking to the past to trying to answer something that's only happened right now. And the studies are going to be talking about association. And repeat after me, association does not mean causation. And the interesting papers that are going to be pulled out are kind of classic ones that we've debunked through this channel for a long time. They're population-based studies, and so the mere number in the study doesn't really mean that it's more valid. She mentioned that there were only 100 or 200 people in a certain study. I'm familiar with that one. It was a survey of people self-describing a carnivore diet, and it's certainly not enough for me to make a policy decision about it, but it is a little bit going in the direction of assembling in a systematic way information about people doing a carnivore diet, which I can't imagine is going to be represented in a study over the last 30 years. Another way to say it is it's comparing apples to oranges.
And by the way, this guy Saladino, this doctor who is so harming people, just was recently interviewed like some months ago, and he's off the carnivore diet himself.
What's he doing now?
He's doing fruit with meat now. He got rid of the carnivore diet because total carnivore, because he was having sleep disturbances, lowering testosterone, and too much joint pain and muscle aches. Because obviously, when you're on a keto or carnivore diet, when you're carbohydrate restricted, you get high amounts of uric acid from all the purines you're eating. And purines are even higher in organ meats, which they recommend, which means more uric acid. And more uric acid means gout. It means more propensity to kidney stones. It means more kidney damage. But it also means more aging of the cartilage and joints.
Well, a couple of comments there. You would never want to take one person's experience. Dr. Saladino might make a change and therefore it's bad. I mean, we're going to see Dr. Furman actually eats the way he promotes, which is great. But I'm not talking about one individual. And the idea that a certain way of eating, you might not adapt and make an accommodation for it, your body metabolism changes. You actually handle these things differently. I see that mistake being made a lot, where under circumstances where you eat carbohydrates, something happens, and then when you don't eat carbohydrates, the same thing must happen. When no, that you can't, that's called an overgeneralization.
And then let's just stick on that. When you're on these keto diets with carbohydrate restricted, you, from meat, dairy, fish, or any kind, you raise IGF-1 into cancer-promoting levels, and that's insulin-like growth factor 1, which is a hormone that promotes cellular replication and promotes angiogenesis, allows cells to replicate and get a blood supply. So it allows tumors to grow. As you're maximizing muscle mass, it allows tumors to grow. So extra protein, even though it may promote a little more muscle mass, extra animal protein promotes IGF-1, and then it also changes the bacteria in the gut, which means that unfavorable bacteria in the gut promotes TMA formation, which is trimethylamine oxide, which is a pro-inflammatory substance that ages us and promotes atherosclerosis. And then this diet high in meat is deficient. It's deficient in vitamin C, it's deficient in folate, it's deficient in vitamin E, it's deficient in phytochemicals, it's deficient in magnesium, it's deficient. So how could these people on these, their diet's deficient, it's producing too much acidity, it's aging their joints, it's promoting cancer, and it's just absolute craziness, and people love to follow it.
Wait a second. I don't know. There is very little evidence to support what he's talking about. So these molecules, the TMAO, the IGF-1, and the related things, actually, if insulin goes down, which happens on a low-carb and keto diet, and the other factors that, yes, the microbiome changes, many things change. Again, it's taking things from the old paradigm of let's study people who eat carbohydrates, see what happens to them with cancer, and if they're high levels of something, then we'll put that over into the low-carb, as she says, carnivore people, people who eat a carnivore diet. I guess we should call people plant-based people. Wait, we're not made of plants. But anyway, all of these things are sort of old pot shots without any evidence. We haven't seen those papers against the carnivore and keto diet yet. Finally, I don't really talk much about my own health and my own way of living, although in the clinic people want to know what I do, because it's not about me. It's not about me getting to a certain age, and it's about you. It's about the science. It's about extrapolating and generalizing is something useful for a lot of different people. And yeah, actually, low carb, keto, and carnivore diet is, and that textbook Ketogenic, the science behind therapeutic carbohydrate restriction, apparently didn't come up in their search.
I am actually surprised because I feel like that's their number one best point is like it has all the vitamins and minerals you need, all the amino acids. It is not deficient. So I'm actually shocked right now to hear you call out these nutrients that it's deficient in.
Folate only comes from plants. Vitamin C comes from plants. Vitamin E comes from plants. Vitamin, all these things come from plants.
And you hear on the internet, actually, people are now saying, there's like posts on it, people believe it, that plants have nutrients or anti-nutrients to and like a poison for you, essentially. Right. So I mean, all animals, like humans from the beginning of time, have been eating berries, plants, and
primates. We're primates.
Totally, which fully eat plants, right?
And we have the undeniable data.
Well, so hang on. Actually, if you eat different food, your requirements for different nutrition, the vitamins and minerals, change. It was a shock when the Inuit and other cultures that did not eat anything but meat, when they didn't have vitamin C deficiency or scurvy. It was a shock. In fact, there was a researcher who lived among the Inuit, came back to New York City and locked himself up for a year in a hospital ward to prove that it was okay to not eat plants, and he didn't become vitamin C deficient. So the idea that you need to eat plants, to me, is not so, it's an open question to me. Now, you can have dogma and say things like that just don't ring true, that, people have eaten plants forever. And I mean, there are certain situations where there were no plants. And although people could adapt to those circumstances. So let's see what the studies say.
And here it's 2024, but here's a study from 2023. Let me just give you the title of this study: Low Carbohydrate Diets, Low Fat Diets, and Mortality in Middle-Aged and Older People, a prospective cohort study. They divided people into cohorts, and a median follow-up, of 23.5 years, with more than 165, almost 166,000 deaths. Imagine the amount of people you have to follow to get 165,000 deaths. They have to follow like 1 million people to get 165,000 deaths.
I wonder how many were following a keto or carnivore diet that's only been around a few years. I wonder. Actually, these studies are cohort studies, which means you follow people over time, you assess their diet at various intervals, and people do the best they can. The low carbohydrate groups in these studies often are eating up to 30% of their calories from carbohydrates, which wouldn't be keto by any, or carnivore, which is a subset of a low carbohydrate keto type, lower extreme carb restriction kind of diet. So I would assume if I was doing a study in one of those and someone said they were eating nothing but meat, you might even throw it out as an outlier, thinking that it was a mistake, that it was an error in the data. But I guess you could pull out, actually, if you ask those researchers how many people, what percent of people were self-endorsing eating nothing but meat. But most of the studies just kind of lump all of those people into a low carbohydrate category.
Okay, so they were able to categorize all these huge amounts of people over 25 years. This is an incredible study published last year. It's just phenomenal.
No, I'm not quite so impressed. No, this is called hypothesis generating research, meaning it gets you in the ballpark, but you have to do a clinical trial, an experiment going forward to really know causation. And this is not just me saying this. This is the evidence-based medicine world that general internal medicine has kind of taken that banner as an area within internal medicine to keep teaching evidence-based medicine, and the difference between hypothesis generating research and hypothesis testing research. So hypothesis testing research would be to say, let's take a couple hundred people and randomize them to eating high carb or low carb, or there are dozens of studies that have done that they're not talking about. actually, because they didn't search low carb, they didn't search carbohydrate restriction. I would give them poor marks as a student doing a literature search if you didn't include all of those different categories. But back to the cohort study.
Okay. And research categorized people as eating either a healthy or unhealthy low-fat or low-carb diet. And what do you think they found? Of course, what they found. All these thousands of people and hundreds of thousands of deaths. What they found is that low-carb diets contribute the most to early life deaths below age 70.
Really?
With people on keto diets, 28% more likely to die of any cause.
Really? Any cause of cancer, heart disease, take your pick.
Participants on an unhealthy low-carb diet, that means not carb, more unhealthy, low carb, more unhealthy proteins, like more meat and bacon and processed foods, increase their mortality risk by 38% every year. 38% increased risk of death every single year they will follow. These people are dropping off like flies.
Yeah, it's Frankenfood.
It's just craziness, right?
It's not real food, though. It's manufactured in a plant that is filled with sugar and all these processed stuff.
Well, we're talking about animal products here. We're talking about
processed foods as well.
No.
I thought that was 38% over the years.
No, participants on low-carb diets, when they were on unhealthy low-carb, which unhealthy low-carb means they were having more red and processed meats.
Oh, I thought you meant like sugar candy. Like could be. Oh, okay.
No. But okay, so that's one aspect.
Well, that's a good point that she made. They were also eating those other foods. So we talk about properly formulated low-carb diets that are really something only kind of recently being taught. I suppose, through the years I've met people who've done Atkins diets or something like that for decades, but it's kind of rare. The penetration of people doing keto or carnivore in a data set like this would be extremely rare, extremely low, and you're not going to be able to get a good, accurate estimate on any of the information there.
And then we have other studies coming out, pretty much the same thing, with the same effects. It's right, I think it's right here. This study coming out in the Lancet. This is really interesting, coming out in 2018. Okay, people who had the lowest amount of carbohydrates had the highest amount of premature death, yes, true. But people who got more than 70% of their energy from carbohydrates also had a higher risk of mortality.
I see what you did there. There's an optimal range.
Right, so here's the thing is that less carbohydrates bad, too much carbohydrate bad. True, people could argue because too much carbohydrates, they were eating maybe more processed carbohydrates like rice or, white rice or white bread, yeah. But still, when they went and analyzed all the long-lived societies and long-lived populations, they found there was an optimal carbohydrate range in the blue zones as well, and the optimal fat range. So they're saying here, and then the people that lived the longest, who were the people? So this is published in the Lancet, 2018. The title of this study is Dietary Carbohydrate Intake and Mortality, a prospective cohort study and meta-analysis of all the studies, right? And they follow the eating patterns of like more than 500,000 people around the world, like 500,000 people we're talking about.
So again, a cohort study is hypothesis generated. It doesn't matter how many people, how many populations, how many meta-analysis is a review or summary of different studies. So, but to me, a meta-analysis that I will look toward are meta-analyses of randomized controlled trials, not meta-analyses of cohort studies. So that's just assembling this murky information. True, there's never been a randomized trial of smoking cigarettes and lung cancer because the association was so strong in these cohort studies. What we see in these studies, the effects are so small that in the evidence-based medicine world, they don't really reach any clinical significance, even though they have statistical significance. And so this is just a kind of a, I suppose my world, it was like the critics of movies, where I'm trained to be a critic of science and a critic of research. And until these are turned around into prospective studies where we're following people over time, we really can't give much information of importance to these cohort studies.
And they found that when you replace carbohydrates with animal products, more death, but both high and low carbohydrates were associated with increased mortality. The sweet spot of the longest life were mid-ranged when people got more protein and fat from high-quality carbohydrates like beans and high-quality proteins like nuts and seeds. So beans and nuts and seeds were the major factor modulating death here and life. More longer life, less life. Okay, so it says, source of food, the whole plant foods, modified the association between carbohydrate intake and mortality. What that means is that this tracking of carbohydrates and mortality showed up because people had either restricted carbohydrates too low, or when they went too high, they didn't use whole food sources of carbohydrates.
Totally.
Because whole food sources of carbohydrates have protein and fat in them, except for fruit. So fruit is the only whole plant food that isn't high in protein. The other plant foods, there are 5 of them: intact grains, vegetables, beans, nuts and seeds. I'm missing one, I guess.
Is there 4 now?
Intact whole grains. I guess there's only 4. Intact whole grains, vegetables, nuts and seeds, and beans, right? Those are the 4 sources of, because fruit is the 6th category, but fruit is kind of low in protein.
Right.
The only way you can make a plant protein consistently too low in protein is with too much fruit, because it'll diminish the amount of the higher protein plant foods you're eating. So as your diet moves towards fruitarian, an excess of calories from fruit, lowering the amount, pushing off your plate those higher protein plant foods, then your diet can become too low in protein as we age and require more protein.
Well, so the old joke, how do you know someone went to a certain university, let's say Duke, that's where I am, just be with them for a minute, they'll mention that they went to Duke or put any other university there. How do you know someone follows a plant-based diet? Just talk to them for a minute and they'll tell you. But I guess you have to understand this is within Dr. Fuhrman's own community, and you can be healthy eating lots of different things. I'm not compelled by the research shown here, the observational association. It does not mean causation studies, and they neglected to include the textbook called Ketogenic, the science behind therapeutic carbohydrate restriction for human health, which came out last fall, which, oh no, the video was done since last fall. And it's a wonderful textbook. It has the randomized trials listed as references in the chapters on low-carb diets, and even the science about keto as a potential therapy for lots of different other diseases than obesity, diabetes, metabolic syndrome, the ones that I teach about and reverse in my clinic. So for information, if you want an excellent essay about the carnivore diet and you don't know about the Substack called Unsettled Science, it's a Substack essay group. I subscribe to the one written by Nina Teicholz and Gary Taubes. They had an excellent, or Nina wrote an excellent review about the carnivore diet and how the media portrays it as some kind of bizarre thing that men do, when actually a lot of women have had health benefits from it. That's a great way to read these investigative journalists, what they're thinking about now. Nina Teicholz and Gary Taubes, the Substack called Unsettled Science. I'd be very curious to know if there's any investigative journalist who ended up promoting or talking about other types of diets other than low-carb diets, because these two got stuck after spending a lot of time writing and investigating about nutrition. And that's why they have this leaning, at least allowing that low-carb diets could be healthy. Even carnivore diets might be healthy. But I agree, the carnivore diet needs more prospective clinical trials, randomized trials if possible. But the question that Nina brings up in her essay is, if something is so good in the short run, reverses diabetes, gets people off these medicines, really you think it's going to be bad in the long run if it's improving all of these things in the short run? So in a certain therapeutic context, it would be worth making that trade-off, at least in the short run, to improve things. I'm not compelled by long-term data on something that's only been around for a short period of time. It doesn't disturb me. I hope it doesn't disturb you if you are following a low-carb diet, especially if you're one of my patients. Hope that's helpful. Please like, subscribe, ring the notification bell so you don't miss out on further videos. I'm putting out new videos every Wednesday and Friday. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, and check out adaptyourlifeacademy.com.